Clusters of Dutch climate migrants arrive, responsible for design of vehicular hover system that replaces subways. 2093. The UN awards TSE Biannual Lighthouse Prize for its high rate of acceptance of climate refugees. Damaged lower city economy stabilizes due to real estate investments from St. John Enterprises. 2098. Myrtle St. John dies. Crazen St. John and daughter Sandra, only living members of illustrious St. John dynasty. 2098. A wave of Nubian teens allegedly awaken to a host of mystical abilities. Swamp rendered barely inhabitable after partial collapse of local seawall. Prologue. He knew his powers were gone long before he opened his eyes. Beneath the castaway, the beach was coarse, his lacerated skin burning. Sand raked his fingertips, filled his mouth. He heard the easy lap of the water nearby. He supposed he should have felt relief that he had washed ashore, though he had no idea where he was. The man slowly opened his eyes, the air thick against his skin as he spat an errant braid from chapped lips, a gesture that required more energy than he had. He couldn't move his hands or limbs, couldn't lift his head, his body a wasted, corpse-like thing almost devoid of life. How long had it been since he'd eaten, since he'd had fresh water? His days defined by the thrashing of the ocean. He shifted his gaze, trying to discern the surrounding landscape. The sand on the horizon was a brilliant gold, even with overcast skies. The castaway lifted his eyes slightly, barely making out the thick copse of palm trees dotting the horizon. A hole opened in the castaway's chest, an agonizing chasm of regret and grief. As much as he wanted it to be, he knew this land wasn't Nubia, and even worse, he knew he'd lost the glorious, wondrous thing he cherished above all else. He closed his eyes, his mind racing to the recent past, to the hurricane he'd chosen to create as an exercise of power. Doing so was his divine right as both sovereign and catalyst, a ritual that would have strengthened his connection to the kinetic. Never had he dreamed that he'd lose control of the storm, that the thunder and winds and rain would become a rampaging terror, destroying everything in its path. His people barely had time to get to the boats as they shrieked and moaned and wailed, sounds that hadn't desecrated his land in eons. The ache in his heart burst forth again as he thought of the other elemental Nubians who'd rushed to his side to try to stem the storm so others could flee. How many people had escaped? Had his wife made it to safety? His brother? "You have to leave with us, you numbskull," his brother had begged, running up to him during the storm. "You must come now or you'll drown." In response, the man had tried to make light of the situation, letting forth a small smile, trying to convey that this absurd situation would soon be resolved, that Nubians would never be run off their land by a storm. Anything to get his stubborn sibling onto the boats to watch over their family. He remembered seeing the last of the vessels leave the shore of his island home amid the wind and rain. He whispered a quick prayer for his pregnant wife as a small league disappeared on undulating waves. The rain grew thicker, and he could barely see the hands he held in front of his body, trying to focus his gifts. He finally grasped that all was lost when the gigantic wave reached the shores of the only home he'd known, and battered his head and arms and torso, and filled his lungs and swept him away, drowning out the screams of the other elementals who'd stood by him. He didn't know how long he'd lost consciousness for, how his body had managed to rise to the ocean's surface from the depths. But when he awoke, he was shocked to find that life still throbbed within his veins. He was even more shocked to find that he was surrounded by floating debris. A Nubian boat, he was sure, destroyed by the hurricane. No survivors to be found. And so he'd clung to a large piece of driftwood as day turned to night, shame eating away at him as he cried, a being once heralded for his power reduced to such vulgar circumstances. His head pounded. He could barely stay awake, much less call forth his gift. And then, after 2 full days had passed and the storm had subsided to reveal a bright blue sky, it had happened.